Hey, are you looking for a refreshing podcast covering fun topics like books and authors? Well, you are out of luck because this podcast should have already been canceled by now. Welcome to another episode of Have You Read This, a podcast for bookworms, hosted by the only person not to receive a pardon from Joe Biden. Load up on ibuprofen because this may be a bumpy ride.
I just finished reading The Count of Monte Cristo, and I can't even begin to explain the level of complexity of that novel and just how much I absolutely enjoyed it. Maybe this is just a sign of how stupid I am, but when I was reading this, I came across the Wikipedia page. There's a whole diagram on the relationship of all of these characters. The whole thing is just unreal to me, and it absolutely lives up to the hype. And for those that don't know, I've kind of made it a habit to start off the year by reading what I would say is like a really long book. And The Count won out over Infinite Jest, 1Q84, and even I think the Border Trilogy series, if I'm wording that correctly, the series from Cormac McCarthy. I really didn't expect that a book that was 1,243 pages would hold my interest as well as The Count did. But now I get it. I fully understand the wide praise and appreciation that the book continuously receives. It's kind of unreal given when it was written that it still holds up today and keeps readers' interest. Right now, I am in the middle of reading Maeve Fly with absolutely zero clue what I'm going to read beyond that, primarily because I have so many new books sitting here on my shelf that it's almost become a problem. Well, almost. It's never really a problem. But so not too long ago, I was asked why I hated Stephen King, and I'm trying to think back to the situation I found myself in that prompted such a question. I want to say I was at a Barnes & Noble and saw a horror book display with a sign that read something along the lines of horror that is not Stephen King, which I appreciate. Like I would shop specifically at that kiosk or table. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what prompted it. It's not like I own any shirts that say, ask me why I hate Stephen King. And I have zero plans of selling something like that if I ever decide to do merch here. But, I've never hosted a Stephen King book burning event here at the house. So the question kind of caught me off guard. It made me wonder, what have I said or done that would give someone the indication that I can't stand Stephen King? I don't believe I've ever said or really even thought to myself, wow, I really hate this dude. And I think I'm similar to a lot of readers that have read a lot of his work. They're very familiar with him. Even if you haven't read anything by Stephen King, I think you're familiar with the guy. But I've read so many of his books, things like The Shining, The Stand, Pet Sematary, It, The Tommyknockers. I even think Mile 81, which is like a really, really short story, Needful Things, Insomnia, stuff like that. I've also watched movies and TV shows based on his writing, and I generally love what I have read and watched. So I don't recall getting into any of King's work where I was like, this is where I draw the line. I can't stand this guy. I'm going to make it a mission to let everybody know that I hate him. I can tell you, however, about a time when I was working my way through one of his books, and I hit one of those points where it was like, I was shocked. I didn't expect what I was reading. It was something very surprising, especially given how little attention I felt this section of the book was. And maybe you're more educated than me. Maybe you're like, wow, this was really mainstream when it happened, but I never heard about this. So when I got to this section of the book, it really threw me for a loop. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a scene near the end of It, which I don't believe can be described in any way other than minors having an orgy. There is an article that Screen Rant put together where they described the scene from It as, quote, a graphic act of group sex initiated by Beverly, the sole female member of the group, end quote. So Beverly suggests that the only way to overcome Pennywise is for all the boys to have sex with her, which then takes place. And at the risk of questioning a creative genius such as King, I can't wrap my head around working on a plot line where the solution to taking out an evil entity involves a group of minor boys taking their turns sexually with a minor girl. King himself has stated that, quote, "I wasn't really thinking of the sexual aspect of it. The book dealt with childhood and adulthood, 1958 and grown-ups," end quote. And it was written, at a different time. Even author Grady Hendrix himself has chimed in and stated that, quote, "Beverly is the one in the book who helps her friends go from being magical, simple children to complicated, real adults," end quote. I've heard that King has apologized for that. There's people that make excuses for it or rationalize it. And I'm going to link all of these sources from the quotes on my website so you can dig deeper if you choose. All I'm saying is that scene was, it really turned me off big time from that book. Even if King did not intend that and had a totally different meaning, reading that now was difficult for me simply because it's dealing with children. You know what? I've decided that this is absolutely a hill that I'm going to die on. Another source of controversy surrounding King and why some people have said that they don't like the guy is his story titled Rage. I had no idea really that this existed until I stumbled across the Celladors YouTube channel where Sam explains in detail why you can't get that book today. I hate to admit this, but I have not read Rage yet, but I did find a copy in a local bookstore, and I actually paid $75 for a hardback. I mean, can you really hate an author while simultaneously spending $75 for one of their books? And I'm going to link the video that Sam put together because it's really good, and I'm going to share that on the website because he does an excellent job with it, and there's no need for me to recreate the wheel. It has over 5 million views, so it's evidence he put together a worthy video. But for anyone who doesn't know the story of Rage, it was written under the name Richard Bachman and published in 1977 and describes a school shooting. The story is said to have been associated with real high school shootings that happened in the 80s and the 90s. King obviously did not want that and pulled the book from publication, which is why finding it is so difficult. Oddly enough, this is not the reason for me to hate the guy. And if anything, I think you have to respect someone willing to pull a creation of their own work from world consumption for fear it could be associated with actual violence, especially towards kids. So if you're looking at your scorecard, the only real point against King so far is a child orgy toward the end of his novel, It. And I think so far that's it on the scorecard. So what about his writing? Do I hate Stephen King because his writing is terrible? A YouTube channel I recently found and have enjoyed is Write Conscious, run by Ian, who is an author and teacher himself. And he put together a video quoting David Foster Wallace's opinion of King. And according to Wallace, King, quote, tries to sound how people really speak, although he's got 2 or 3 tricks. He's just got a real limited range. He can do the same character and brain voice over and over and over again, which would be fine if he didn't write 2 books a year, end quote. And I mean, who am I to disagree with David Foster Wallace, right? Well, I am someone with an opinion that has money to purchase books, and I think that qualifies me to have a different opinion. One of the comments under this video, and I thought it was great, was one, and it just stood out, and I thought it was pretty accurate. And it said, "It's like Da Vinci hating Charles Schultz. We go to both writers for different reasons, and King writes out of a joy over creating a whole world by the seat of his pants," end quote. Personally, I've never felt King was limited with what he could create. I didn't see him that way. This is the same guy who wrote Stand By Me or The Body and Cujo, 2 wildly different stories. And what I recall the most about some of the more lengthy works from King was how he took a lot of characters that initially felt as if they were not interconnected at all and brought them all together in a very unique way. The 2 books that stand out the most for me with that were The Tommyknockers and Needful Things. I think those are probably 2 of my favorites so far. But my biggest complaint actually might be the amount of character development in terms of the details given. I don't need Jon's whole history from birth. You can develop a character without that. There were times where I felt like, good grief, we don't need to know any of this stuff. The story would still be impactful without all of this information, and I would have 400 less pages to read. I also wonder if people would flock to a novel and proclaim their undying love for the work if it carried any other name than King. If you took the story of Pet Sematary, but put some other author's name on it, never claimed it as Stephen King, would people still love it as much? Would anyone even know about it? Would it have been made into a movie? So when King first started writing, the general view among publishers was that an author was limited to about one book per year. Writing more than that was basically frowned upon because the public just wouldn't accept it. I kind of wonder if that would fly today, because there's certain authors that I follow that if I got a new book from them once a month, I would love that. And I think that they would do a fantastic job. But since King was able to turn out more work frequently, he used the name of Richard Bachman. And King also stated that he released the Bachman novels with as little marketing presence as possible and did his best to load the dice against Bachman. And when looking up the information about this, I thought it was pretty interesting, because I found that when he released Thinner in 1984 under the name of Bachman, it sold 28,000 copies. But once it was revealed that Bachman was actually Stephen King, Thinner sold 10 times as many. So did the sales increase due to the talent of King or the recognition of his name? Because the quality was still the same. So it's just questions that I had. I could buy into an argument that a King novel is not Blood Meridian or even The Count of Monte Cristo. However, I also don't believe that is what King sets out to achieve when he is writing and creating. Usually when Stephen King hate shows up on the likes of Reddit or social media, one of the things that I really like, a bookstore owner or employee will chime in and mention how Stephen King brings readers into the stores. People who aren't avid readers, or maybe somebody hasn't read anything at all, they're looking to read their first book. Maybe they're only going to read one book this year. They know the King name and they're familiar with at least a surface level degree of information about his work. Now that could easily help turn someone from a non-reader into a reader and keep them coming back to explore more authors. So as for me, I don't have any plans to read a King novel in really this year or the immediate future, maybe aside from Rage. I do have that one on my list that's I think is a priority read. Like I want to tackle that. I have an unread copy of Billy Summers on my shelf at the moment that I plan on getting around to one of these days. My avoidance of King's work is not out of hatred, but more so out of the desire to read other authors' work that I've not yet read at this point. So my friends, I submit all of this to you as evidence that I actually do not hate Stephen King, because unlike Jake Paul or the Kardashians, Stephen King can actually contribute something to this world worth having and paying attention to. Well, folks, that is all the brilliance that I am capable of mustering today. I truly hope that your expectations were sufficiently lowered, because I really aim for mediocrity here. If you somehow managed to enjoy this, maybe hit a subscribe button, leave a absolutely glowing review, because I myself thrive on validation from strangers. But remember, only 5 stars review. If you're thinking of 4, you know what? You can keep that crap to yourself. Follow me on social media at Have You Read This Podcast for more content that you didn't ask for, and I will see you next time.